I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily Week in Review. The second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic will dominate Parliament when it resumes today after a 6-week break. Members of Parliament are expected to work together to allow virtual attendance in the House of Commons once again. That's because much of the country remains under lockdown to slow the spread of the virus. Opposition parties intend to challenge the federal government over delays in the delivery and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines. They also want to see more support for families and businesses. There have been more than 747,000 cases of COVID-19 in Canada. The first known case of the virus in this country was detected on this day 1 year ago. The 56-year-old man, known as Patient Zero, arrived at Sunnybrook Hospital in Toronto with what seemed to be mild pneumonia. A lab later confirmed that the man, who had traveled to China, was infected with the novel coronavirus. There's a downtrend in COVID-19 cases in key hotspot regions of the country. Canada's Chief Public Health Officer says there has been an improvement in the numbers in BC, Alberta, Ontario and Quebec. But Dr. Teresa Tam says it's too soon to be sure that current measures are strong and broad enough to maintain the lower caseloads. Officials in Nunavut are recording a surge in new COVID-19 cases after weeks without any. And New Brunswick's Edmundston region is now under a strict lockdown to limit the spread of the virus. Police in Regina say they monitored a weekend protest outside the home of Saskatchewan's top doctor and are still determining if further action will be taken. The Regina Police Service says that officers responded to a report of a protest on Saturday afternoon at the residence of Dr. Saqib Shahab, the province's chief medical officer of health. Premier Scott Moe condemned the protest, saying in a statement that those who disagree with his government's decisions should take their issues up with him or a local legislator. BC is set to release a report today that assessed its response to COVID-19 outbreaks in long-term care homes during the first wave of the pandemic. Health Minister Adrian Dix says the ministry commissioned the report by Ernst & Young to learn lessons from the first wave, and its assessment of the government's actions is overwhelmingly favorable. More than 650 of the province's roughly 1,100 deaths have been in long-term care homes. Schools in 7 public health units across southern Ontario reopened for in-person classes today. Education Minister Stephen Lecce says that means 100,000 students will be returning to the classroom for the first time since before the winter break. The province is implementing more safety measures in areas where schools are reopening. Students in grade 1 through 3 will be required to wear masks indoors when physical distancing is impossible outside. Schools in the Greater Toronto Area, Hamilton and Windsor remain closed. Ottawa lawyer Yavar Hamid says the COVID-19 pandemic has caused an uptick in complaints of toxic workplaces. That is leading more employees to seek legal solutions like human rights complaints, health and safety inspections, constructive dismissal damages, or even accommodation for post-traumatic stress disorder. Human resources consultant Janet Candido says workplaces should train managers to intervene in disputes across departments rather than putting the onus on workers to confront their bosses. WestJet says a Boeing 737 MAX that was scheduled to fly from Calgary to Toronto on Friday returned to the gate before taking off due to a warning in the cockpit. WestJet spokeswoman Lauren Stewart says that after the plane's engines were started, its monitoring system indicated a potential fault that needed to be verified and reset. She says the process takes time and requires an engine run, which the airline does not perform with passengers on board. The MAX was cleared to fly in Canadian airspace last week after it was grounded for nearly 2 years following 2 deadly crashes. The second week of a 4-week election campaign is ramping up in Newfoundland and Labrador. The 3 major party leaders will spread out across the province today to make policy announcements. Liberal leader Andrew Furey will be in Labrador. Progressive Conservative leader Ches Crosby will be on the west side of Newfoundland with a stop scheduled at the Corner Brook Hospital, while NDP leader Alison Coffin is back in St. John's after a trip to Labrador. Unreported government data suggests some Alberta rivers and streams have already been heavily contaminated by coal mining. Since at least the late 1990s, Alberta Environment has monitored water upstream and downstream from 3 mines. A former senior department official who took the data with him when he resigned from the government in 2018 has analyzed it for the Canadian press. Bill Donahue says it shows that selenium, which can be toxic to humans and fish, is 6 times higher in the McLeod River downstream from the Cheviot mine. All right, don't go away. We take a look at stories from across Canada this past week when we return, starting in BC, where the health minister apologized for a delay in the province's long-term care report, while Alberta ordered international travelers to isolate, and a group of protesters gathered outside the home of Saskatchewan's chief public health office.
BC's health minister is apologizing for the delay in releasing an independent report into the province's handling of COVID-19 in long-term care homes. Health Minister Adrian Dix says as the minister responsible, he's to blame. The third-party report reveals confusion over policies and infection prevention in long-term care facilities. More than 650 of BC's more than 1,100 deaths from COVID-19 have been in long-term care facilities. Changes are coming to Alberta's travel rules. This is as a result of the province's first case of a COVID-19 variant first seen in the UK. Health Minister Tyler Shandro says international passengers returning to Alberta via Calgary's airport or at the border crossing with the U.S. will have to remain in isolation between their first and second COVID-19 tests. Up until now, they could go freely after receiving a negative test result and before getting a second test 6 or 7 days later. The Saskatchewan Health Ministry says Chief Medical Officer Dr. Saqib Shahab won't let a protest outside his home distract him from his important work. The ministry says in a statement Dr. Shahab won't be commenting today on the demonstration against COVID-19 restrictions in Regina on Saturday. The ministry says he will give a provincial health update tomorrow. Premier Moe called protesters idiots for going to Dr. Shahab's home. The Saskatchewan Medical Association accuses them of intimidation and harassment. A Winnipeg epidemiologist says in some cases, standing in line to get into a store can put you at greater risk of getting COVID-19 than being in the store itself. Cynthia Carr of EPI Research says retailers are working hard with capacity and cleanliness, but lineups are choking points. Ms. Carr says shoppers need to be careful how long they are in a lineup for. They must keep their distance and keep a mask on. Ontario is shifting the focus of its vaccination program due to a shortage of doses. Officials say shots for long-term care staff and essential caregivers will be temporarily suspended so they can administer the remaining stock to nursing home residents. The government announced the change as it and other parts of the country deal with the delivery delays from Pfizer-BioNTech. The company announced no shots were expected to be delivered this week. Health officials in Ontario say they are taking further measures to trace a more contagious strain of COVID-19. Dr. Vanessa Allen with Public Health Ontario says they are deploying tests to find possible cases of the variants of concern before sending them for genomic screening. This could take days. The new variant of the virus, which was first reported in the UK late last year, is being blamed for a deadly outbreak at a long-term care home in Barrie, Ontario, north of Toronto. Mayors in regions of Quebec where the COVID-19 infection rate is low are calling for an easing of restrictions. Mark Parent, the mayor of Rimouski, says his region, which reported a single new case yesterday, shouldn't be treated like Montreal. Earlier this month, following a rise in COVID-related hospitalizations, Quebec Premier François Legault ordered all non-essential businesses across the province to close and imposed a curfew for virtually all Quebecers until February 8th. Typically, in Canadian elections, Conservatives promise to balance budgets, while Liberals accuse them of hiding secret agendas to cut public services, but not in Newfoundland and Labrador. Progressive Conservatives are campaigning against balancing the budget while accusing the Liberals of trying to pass through a secret plan full of cuts. This led Tim Powers of Abacus Data feeling he is living through opposite day. Mr. Powers says Newfoundland and Labrador have always marched to the beat of their own drum. He says this winter's pandemic election will likely be no different. For many Canadians in major cities, high-speed internet can be taken for granted. Officials in Nova Scotia say they are working to extend high-speed internet coverage to 99% of the province. They say the expansion will provide speedy internet access to an additional 5,600 homes and businesses. The new project is aiming at getting Western Nova Scotia, the Annapolis, the South Shore, and other regions all up to speed by the end of 2023.
Stay with us. More national and international news coming up for you on the Forum Daily Week in Review. This past week, we discussed how the pandemic is causing delays in Canadian immigration processes, leaving thousands of applicants in limbo as they wait for citizenship or permanent residency status. We spoke in depth with Mr. Mario Bellissimo from Bellissimo Law Group, specializing in citizenship and immigration, on this issue and other aspects of the Canadian immigration processes being affected during the pandemic. More on this story and other news when we return in our Week in Review. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be right back with more news from around the world. The COVID-19 pandemic has led to yet another delay in an important process of many people's lives, applying for Canadian citizenship. Meanwhile, some applicants have been waiting years to secure their permanent residency in Canada. As work permits expire for some applicants, there are concerns around being forced to leave the country or even having access to health care. To talk more on the situation for thousands of immigrants across Canada, we are joined by Mr. Mario Bellissimo from Bellissimo Law Group, specializing in citizenship and immigration. Sir, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So how has the pandemic affected citizenship applications and permanent residency applications? Can you give us an update on these processes right now?
Well, like every aspect of our reality, COVID-19 has had crippling effects, and immigration processing has definitely not been immune to those effects. Clearly, between travel restrictions, the need to repatriate Canadians, those that are vulnerable, as well as the need to continue the modernization of immigration processing, this has all led to delays and not meeting immigration targets.
And what are some of the social and economic limitations that immigrants have in Canada prior to becoming permanent residents or Canadian citizens?
Well, immigrants, as you can imagine, fuel every facet of our society, and they're, uniquely situated depending on their potential employment, what role they're playing, are they coming in through family class? But the limitations always boil down to processing times, the need for that enhanced status, the ability to fully integrate into society. So anything that delays that processing or delays the issuance of critical status documents has a severe effect.
And is there any help available for citizenship and PR applicants at this time?
All considered, Immigration Canada has done a pretty good job of continuing and accelerating the modernization of processing, moving more applications to online. Are there more steps that can be taken? Yes. We may have to really almost look to modernization bordering on revolutionary steps to face these unprecedented times.
Now, meanwhile, Canada has not met its immigration goal during the pandemic. What would that mean for our economic goals if we don't hit our immigration targets, sir?
It's an excellent question. There is inevitably going to be short and long-term economic consequences. Immigration, anything from performing critical research to food supply chain issues, to healthcare, to family reunification and allowing parents to come to Canada or a spouse to re-enter with their child. All of this affects individuals' abilities microscopically to work in their own families, but also on a societal level to fuel all that critical economic need we face every single day.
So what realistic steps, as you mentioned, need to be taken to improve our immigration system and meet our immigration goals here in Canada?
I think we need to continue to move more applications away from paper-based to online, and that includes caregiver applications, parental sponsorships, spousal sponsorships, PR cards. We need to continue to move with reasonable exceptions because we obviously have to accommodate those that may have special requirements, but that move has to continue. But the answer does not strictly lie only in the immigration sphere. We need to move forward with fusing the delivery of medical services and fuse that with the delivery of immigration services. And what do I mean by that? Well, we see in other countries individuals that are able to arrive at a border, have their medical histories accessible on their smartphone device. These always have to be balanced with privacy concerns, but we have to be realistic. More has to be done at the border in terms of screening. That screening has to happen in an effective and efficient manner. And we have to continue the digitalization of all these services, centralizing our information sources so critical decisions can be made at the border to protect the integrity of the system, to protect Canadians, and to ensure that we stem the COVID spread, which is obviously every country's concern at this time.
All right, Mr. Mario Bellissimo from Bellissimo Law Group. Again, thank you so much for your time today, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Up next, more international news from around the world from this past week. Lebanon saw over 200 people injured in a violent protest in the country's north. Iran said its nuclear production program is exceeding its goals, and India donated 500,000 doses of vaccines to Sri Lanka. Also, after gaining worldwide attention for his mittens and pose at the presidential inauguration, Senator Bernie Sanders made $1.8 million for charities in Vermont. A World Health Organization team has emerged from quarantine in the Chinese city of Wuhan to start field work in a fact-finding mission on the origins of the virus that caused the COVID-19 pandemic. The mission has become politically charged as China seeks to avoid blame for alleged missteps in its early response to the outbreak. And there are questions as to what access the team will be given. Lebanon state media says violent confrontations between protesters and security forces have left a 30-year-old man dead and more than 220 people injured in the country's north. The violence in Tripoli, Lebanon's second largest city and the most impoverished, marked a serious escalation in protests that began Monday and continued for 3 straight days into Wednesday night. Deteriorating living conditions and strict coronavirus lockdown measures are fueling the fires of conflict. Iranian state TV says Iran has exceeded 17 kilograms of 20% enriched uranium within a month's time. That moves Iran's nuclear program closer to weapons-grade enrichment levels amid heightened tensions with the U.S. Uranium enriched to 20% is a short technical step away from weapons-grade 90% enrichment. Western nations have criticized Iran's enrichment activity and called on Tehran to adhere to a 2015 nuclear accord. Sri Lanka's president has welcomed the first 500,000 doses of a COVID-19 vaccine from India, which has donated the shots to 8 countries in the region. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine was manufactured by the Serum Institute of India. Sri Lanka is making efforts to obtain more vaccines, either through donation or purchase. The country has ordered 2 million doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine and is planning to order 3 million more from India. India says its relationship with China is at a crossroads, with the months-long military standoff in border areas profoundly disturbing the ties. India's external affairs minister said in a speech that if peace and tranquility in the border areas are disturbed, there will be profound repercussions for the entire world. The standoff has continued despite 9 rounds of meetings involving local military commanders and the political dialogue by foreign and defense ministers. Singapore's government has detained without trial a 16-year-old student who made detailed plans and preparations to attack Muslims at 2 mosques. The Internal Security Department said the teen was inspired by an Australian gunman who killed 51 worshippers at 2 mosques in New Zealand in 2019. It says the Singapore youth planned to carry out his attack on March 15th, the 2nd anniversary of the Christchurch attack. The teen is the youngest terror suspect held under the country's Internal Security Act. A closely watched annual study by a watchdog organization suggests that countries with the least corruption are in the best position to weather the COVID-19 pandemic in both health and economic challenges. Transparency International concluded that countries that performed well had invested more in healthcare. The 2020 Corruption Perceptions Index suggests that they were better able to provide universal health coverage and are less likely to violate democratic norms. Australia's competition watchdog says a lack of competition for Google and a lack of transparency in the digital advertising supply chain need to be addressed. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission released a report on its inquiry into the Google-dominated digital advertising services industry in Australia. The Commission chair alleges that Google often was acting on behalf of both publishers and advertisers for the same ad sale while selling its own ad inventory. People who own an Apple iPad or iPhone often see reminders to update their devices. The tech company is urging its customers to install the latest update without delay. Apple says the latest update plugs security flaws that might have been actively exploited by hackers. The software updates were made available starting Tuesday, and with them came a warning from Apple that the security holes were a serious threat. Apple has provided few details about the nature of the threat. Well, those woolly mittens that U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders wore to the presidential inauguration, which sparked endless memes across social media, have actually helped to raise $1.8 million in 5 days for charitable organizations in his home state of Vermont. The sum comes from the sale of online merchandise with the January 20th image of him sitting with his arms and legs crossed, clad in his brown parka and recycled wool mittens. Mr. Sanders put the first of the Chairman Sanders merchandise, including t-shirts, sweatshirts, and stickers, on the website last week and sold out twice. Mr. Sanders' now famous mittens were made by Jen Ellis, a Vermont elementary school teacher who has a side business making mittens out of recycled wool. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news from this past week. Make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for updates. All right, thanks for joining us, everyone, and have a great weekend.